I didn't.
Yeah. Talk to me about that process of like not knowing who she was, finding out who she is, and then writing this poem that you're going to spit for us.
Yeah, so I learned something about myself and my process, because I realized like so much about my witchcraft or like my magic making is in naming things. And I didn't have her name when I wrote the poem. They got an archivist to find her name, and the poem was already written before I knew her name was Pamela Echols. But she is familiar to me. She's also extraordinary in like her risk-taking behavior. You don't even have to know backstory. This photo tells you she took chances, like incalculable chances, right? So for me, it was about the acknowledgement that Black women in particular have always been so extraordinary, so supernatural. Whether we have been named or not, that's why I was drawn to her. And again, because his uniform suggests that he's a police chief. So something catalyzed this sister to jump off the curb and do this, knowing that she might not make it home, you know? I'm fascinated by that. I'm fascinated by the ancestors whose names we don't know, whose miracles that they performed and we weren't aware of them, but we're still the beneficiaries of those miracles. I'm fascinated by that.
Right on. Yeah, and so writing something for a woman you've never met before who inspired you in some way, who you wanted to give agency to, this is something that you've done before. In your book, Anarcha Speaks, and Anarcha is the woman who is one of the enslaved women who was operated on by the guy who's considered the
father of modern day
gynecology, exactly. But I'm wondering like what is the difference between doing writing that book for Anarcha and writing this poem for Pamela? Like what did you discover in this process of creating a story for Pamela?
So this is my specific philosophical orientation. So I'm not trying to preach or proselytize or suggest that this applies to everyone. But I do operate from a fair amount of ancestral logic, which is to say, I'm willing to be available to whoever needs to say something, right? To or through me. And for her, she preceded me, and there was all this life happening before I even entered the chat, right? Before I even was on the planet. And yet she is my familiar, in the same way that Anarcha is my familiar, though she lived and died before I was ever even a concept. And so for me, it's about, we still have the opportunity to family folks whose names we may not know, whose backstory we may not know. We still have the opportunity to family these folks, to bring them into the chat, to bring them into the space, to bring them into our consciousness, to center them and say, you deserve.
Facts.
Yeah.
Facts.
So it matters. It's all good medicine. Anarcha was the subject of experimentation. To talk about her, you had to talk about J. Marion Sims, the white man who experimented on her in order to be known for gynecological work. Pamela Echols had this moment. And then as far as history is concerned, or archives are concerned, she went on being a Black woman, living her Black ass life. We don't know what happened after this, but this moment was seismic. And it needed to be named, and it needed language to be curated for it. So I was really happy to be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. I'm like,
amen.
Ashe. All the things. I'm so excited to hear the piece out loud, because I've read the piece, and I'm excited for folks here to hear it as well. But like, I guess I'm wondering, like, what do you hope that people here take away from Pamela's story, from the photo and Pamela's story that you've created, the language that you've curated for her? Like, once this is all over, what is the thing that you hope that people will leave with?
Okay, so I think that you should know that there was a critical juncture in this woman's life at that riot in Wisconsin in 1967, in which she was willing to get her chin out over her feet and risk her life to mean something. I want you to know that you borrow bone and blood from somebody who did the exact same thing at one point or another, or you would not be here.
Facts.
Yes.
I want her to matter to you, even if she's new to you. I want her to matter to you. I want you to family her in whatever way feels appropriate. I want you to say her name if that feels appropriate. I want you to remember that ordinary people do extraordinary things all the time, and you don't need TMZ to tell you that.
Yes.
Facts.
Ordinary people do extraordinary things all the time. You've probably performed several miracles this morning just to get here. That's what I want you to know. That's all I want you to know.
All right.
Yeah. I'm gonna shut up. I think it's time. Is it time, y'all? Is it time to hear? Yeah? All right. Go ahead.
One more time for the acts before this.
Yes. Please. Give it up.
And for the inductees, one more time for the DJ. Hey.
Yes, Ethan, please, hey, please help everybody's Ethan.
One time for the host.
Thank
I
you.
love him. Okay. Literally. All right, so this poem is from Miss Pamela Echols. It's the long, hot summer of '67, and somebody took a picture of you punching a police officer. We gotta talk about it. Before I learned your name, you looked like a Gladys or a Henrietta to me. One of them Negro names that got a story attached to it or an ancestor. Maybe you had a seamstress job or worked nights in a bakery so you could go to community college during the day. Maybe you wanted to be a nurse. And maybe you still lived with your mama. Maybe she made banana pudding every year around Christmas time and maybe you helped her with it. Maybe you had two brothers, one named Harold, the other called Al, standing by the window waiting for you to come home, and when you didn't, maybe your mama grabbed her purse and sent the boys to a lady called Mama Ann who lived next door. Maybe your daddy left work early to look for you. Your mama probably told him she heard there was trouble, and since you weren't home, maybe you were mixed up in that trouble. I'm saying, I see you getting off the bus, headed to the movies when a brother runs up with a wild in his eye that won't be talked down by anything, tells you cops beat a boy over on 3rd and Walnut, and since black folk were already dying and always dying without any businesses closing early or shops boarding their windows or traffic delayed because of it, maybe Milwaukee needed a revolution. Hell, Harlem and Philly had one in 1964, LA in 65, Cleveland and Chicago in 66, and in the summer of 1967 in Milwaukee, on July 30th, you wore a white sweater and took the time to curl your hair. To go to a picture show with a man you met at church the week before. You calculated it would take you an hour to get ready, 10 minutes to walk to the bus stop, 28 minutes on the bus, 7 minutes to the theater. That left you with 20 minutes to spare. But a brother you'd never met before hooked his arm in yours and told you your purpose was waiting for you on 3rd Avenue. You wore a black skirt with patent leather shoes and a white sweater. You had been careful, do you hear me, careful to make sure it stayed white. But there you were, walking down the street headed toward 3rd, headed toward a crime scene, knowing you would get dirty. Hold up, you see that vulture circling overhead, imitating winter? There's always a vulture in a poem like this one, looking for the bodies. When they find them, they feast. Never mind that. A girl with a red dress runs by with a baby on her hip and rollers in her hair, headed toward 3rd and Walnut, same as you. By the time you get there, you're gonna be red too. Too red to be a girl, or a daughter, or a nurse.
You swallowed your tongue and a razor blade grew in its place. You got one mind now, one heart, a blood corsage stitched in your chest. Non-violence is a stillbirth, a baby you don't know how to hold. Cut to 3 boys throwing rocks, fires being set, windows smashed, cut to looting, fighting, whole lot of folks screaming, shots heard on Center Street. What do you do first? Do you join the ones singing about eyes on the prize, or the ones running into stores and coming out with lamps and cigarettes, quilts and cowboy boots they'd never wear? A sharp thud happens behind you. 2 officers pull the boy to the ground. He's foaming at the mouth and kicking. An officer with blonde hair sits on his legs. The redhead one puts a knee in his neck. Black is going blue. You didn't know it then, but the same thing would happen 53 years later to a man in Minnesota, and fires would be set in his name. I think they might have called you Henrietta. Something sturdy like that. I think midnight was coming on, resuscitated by the crack of the whip, my bad. The thump of the billy club don't have the same ring to it, but I'll keep it current. I think you stood on the block and meant it, got your chin out over your feet, leaned into your rage and found it to be a holy place. You know, the temple with gamblers beaten over. Don't know what kind of rumble you had inside you, but you found it, incubating behind your ribs. Your ribs, a rotting harp, a rollick and sizzle behind the eyes. War, the Shango gene, colossal woman with a bone to pick. 2 right fists be how you worship, plucked from your outrage. I can see you, taking it all in. The boy on the ground with his skull busted open, cop standing on his neck watching him go blue. A girl your age with a broken jaw, it's dangling on her neck like a wind chime. Black folks screaming, cops snatching collars, the billy club bludgeoning. You can't find the girl with the red dress and rollers. You wonder if her baby's okay. The brother you came with is in the back of a patrol car, his left eye swollen shut. War. You hear a child cry, but you can't figure where the sound is coming from. All white stores are on fire, black soot falling on your face. The world got so much hurt in it. It's spilling out right here on 3rd and Walnut. You got one heart, 2 fists, no point signifying. You ain't come all this way to be tragic, not in your winter white sweater on a date night you did. You gonna work out your destiny right here on this corner. A pilgrimage to the lion's mouth. Police chief coming up mean and quick. Mean it. Your mama's favorite scripture sounding off in your ears. If God is for us, who can be against us? Facts. Now you Medusa, an old curse. Tituba back with bigger hands. You gonna use them. Come off that curb with your people on your back. You know what it means. Chief got a feeling you gonna be a problem. Got his club already raised. He doesn't know who you are. The version in his head is fiction. Bed wench, wet nurse, mammy. He doesn't know you detonated every story that languaged you small. He thinks you're conquered. He finna fuck around and find out black women been impossible. Been crooned a midnight curse. Been a blood ritual. What mattered in the end is the distance between your fist and your fear. You cursed the curse, sis. Got behind it and put it under your feet. In my world, and it's my poem, so it's my world. You made it out that night. In my world, you win. You buried your fist in the police chief's face, and I'm writing this, so I bring you a chariot trembling up from the earth, cracking the pavement to lift you out and away that night. In my world, there are black people in the future. In my world, we forget how to die. In my world, you borrow from the lineage of Lazarus, brave sister, archival conqueror. You the biggest pronoun, and so I write you alive, whole and intact someplace, with grandbabies who drop applesauce on the floor and have your smile. Maybe you got a Newport tacked behind your ear, a gin and tonic in your hand, feet up in the living room listening to Marvin Gaye. I come up hard, baby. But now I'm cool. Right. Ferocious sister, as it turns out, they call you Pamela. A Greek name that means all sweetness, the irony. I know you by how you throw your right hand. I know you by your knuckles. Pamela means all sweetness. Sweetness unless, sweetness until, Sweet sister, you looked like a Henrietta or a Gladys to me. But Miss Pamela, mostly, you look like possible to me. You look like love to me. You look like the future to me. You look like every poem I want to write. You, every day I survived childhood, every time I said no and meant it. Miss Pamela, you look like every traffic stop I made it out of, every CVS burning. You look like who I'm trying to be. You look like who we've always been. Miss Pamela, you look like home to me. You look like home to me. You look like home.
Thank you.